Da er en glede å ønske velkommen til Asialink TV. Asialink, norsk misjonsorganisasjon som jobber i Asia med fokus på unådde folkegrupper. Du finner oss både på Asialink TV, våre websider, og du finner oss også på ulike TV-kanaler. Velkommen skal du være. I dag har vi besøk av Eugene Bach. Han jobber i en organisasjon som heter Back to Jerusalem. Men han har et interessant vitnesbyrd, og det skal du få lov til å bli kjent med nå. Eugene, what a pleasure to have you here in studio with us. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Please give some background. Who are you and where are you from? Eugene Bach sounds a little bit Germanish, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in the cornfields of Indiana, and everybody was named Smith, Baker, these English names. So I was the only one. I was the closest thing that we had to a minority with my German name where I grew up. But I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be on here. It's such a good thing to be connected with Asia Link, and I'm very thankful.
It's our pleasure to have you here. So.
I don't know if I've actually shared with you my background before, but I grew up in a small farming community. I grew up in a single mother home for much of my life. My real father passed away when I was very young, so I don't remember him. And then my mother, not having Christ in her life, she was not a Christian. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, but not having Christ in her life, she turned to drugs as her assistant to kind of help her through those times. So I grew up in that environment. She married and divorced and remarried about 4 or 5 different times. So I got to know different stepfathers in my home, and somewhere around the age of 14, I began to get in trouble a lot, was arrested, put on probation, put on house arrest. And it was during that time that I was taken to a church. And I always felt that churches were this place, right? That is kind of like clean, and this is where people that have a lot of money go to, not a place that I was invited to. But when I went for the very first time, I felt this order and this feeling of love and mercy and kindness that I loved. And it was that time at the age of 14 that I gave my heart to Christ. And so that's how I became a Christian at a young age and never turned back. Even in my family, where my mother was married to a guy that was not a Christian. I mean, to say you're not a Christian in America is not an understood thing all the time, because a lot of people say, of course I'm a Christian. Yeah. I'm American. But they have no relationship with Christ. So my family didn't have any relationship with Christ. They were not Christians at the time. So I actually, in a very mild sense, had persecution, where a lot of my daily activities were frowned upon. My weekend attendances to the church were frowned upon. My choice of music was frowned upon. So I started to feel a little bit of that, but it was something that I would never trade for anything. So 14 was when I came to Christ.
Right. Then you also moved through the school years, but you also quickly put yourself in the military.
I did.
And this is important.
It is.
This is an important background for the second part of your life. I mean, the ministry part we will come back to shortly. Yeah. So share a little bit how that was. How was that to be a believer in the military and being drilled and trained and all those challenges?
This is where we might actually lose a few people in your audience, because what I'm going to say is very controversial, but it's my testimony. It is what I know to be true. And when I was very young, soon after I became a believer, I felt that God called me into the military. So I joined the military because I felt that that's what God called me to do. God called me into the military from my relationship with him. That's what I understood. And then I felt he called me out of the military. He did both. So I was called to go into the military, but because of my criminal background, I couldn't go. I couldn't join. So I signed up for the military. They wouldn't take me. I was rejected. So the only way that I could get into the military was I had to go to my teachers and my employers and ask them to sign a waiver not a confession, but a type of a document that would say that they can vouch for my behavior, that I had changed since I had been arrested and put on house arrest. And everything was good. I had a great relationship with my teachers. Once I became a believer, I changed everything. But there was one testimony, if you want to call it that came from my probation officer. And my probation officer, I remember it very well. She said, and I thought we had a great relationship. She told the Marine Corps, because I was joining the U.S. Marine Corps. She wrote in a paper, said, do not believe him. I would not take him. He will never amount to anything in his life. He has not changed at all. And I thought that was kind of interesting, coming from the very person that was supposed to help rehabilitate me. So the only way then that I could get into the military was I had to go to the congressional building and find a member of Congress that would sign a piece of paper for me. So I traveled. I remember I was 17. I traveled by myself to the state capitol building, and I went and explained myself to a couple of secretaries, and they got me in to talk with a congressional member. To this day, I can't tell you who they were. I was nervous. I thought for sure they were going to kick me out, but this was my only opportunity. This was the only way I could do it.
Wow, you have to be quite convinced to go through this very rigorous process to even get in there.
To even get in.
Yeah, wow.
And that congressional member sat me down in his office, asked me some questions, talked with me for a little bit, and said, young man, I will give you a chance. Signed a piece of paper. I took that with me to my recruiter, and they gave me the only job that they could get me in the military, which was infantry. That was the lowest of the low that they could, qualify me for. So I went to infantry in the military and loved every minute of it.
What did the military do to you?
One of the great things about serving in the military is that I got to travel around the world. So I found myself working on the front lines of where the terrorists were attacking. So I knew about the Taliban before it became, world news. So I was in Kenya when the Taliban had attacked. I did 2 tours in the Persian Gulf where I was on the border of Iraq and also just kind of crossed into the border running anti-terrorist operations. I had a lot of opportunities to serve in higher levels. So I was able to talk with a man one day that told me that the hardest unit that you can get into was scout snipers. I remember he told me this, and I always wanted to be in whatever was difficult. I chose the Marine Corps because people told me that's the hardest one. And then when I got into the Marine Corps, they told me that scout snipers was the hardest school to get into. So I was like, I want to do that school. And one of the things that I learned is that by looking at individuals, you never know who is going to make it through some of the hardest trials that you have in the military. And I remember specifically looking at individuals when I first joined the military. People that were muscle bound, intimidating, like they got onto the bus that I was on, and I'm shaking like, how am I going to compete with this guy? This guy looks like he could eat me for breakfast. And then I would see some scrawny nerd walk on with glasses bigger than his face, and think to myself, if this guy can do it, I know that I can. He's surely going to not make it through this training. But what you find is that it's often the individuals that everybody views as being tough, strong. They're usually loud. They're the ones that end up crying, saying, please get me out of here. I can't do this anymore. And then those quiet, scrawny, nerdy looking guys end up becoming your killers, the individuals who just eat through some of the hardest training. This showed me that you don't always understand a person from the outside appearance. That has done me well serving on the mission field, meeting with individuals that are hard to reach, that come from hard to reach tribes. And then other tribes that might be more friendly, open. You find that the ones that are the most, friendly and receptive might be the hardest people to reach. And then the ones that just give you the hardest problems, the biggest challenges, sometimes the biggest threat to security, end up being the most zealous believers once they make that
So not judging people by their appearance would be a big takeaway.
Oh, big. Yeah.
Another thing, you mentioned you were a scout sniper.
Yeah.
Norwegians and people with non-military background, as myself, we don't know exactly what that means. But I understand that a scout sniper means that you will be actually ahead of the rest of the military group because you will have a special assignment to take down strategic targets.
Yeah.
But that means that you could be captured by the enemy. So did you train any of that? We will get back to this shortly, but did you train any of that, how to disguise yourself, how to get away, how to run away, how to get out of prison? Was that part of your training as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, a lot of people, when they think of scout snipers, they think of people that are very good shooters. The truth is you can teach almost anybody to be a good shooter. But it is the other attributes that you need to train people. They have to be able to suffer, make it through very hard times. That's just the ability to live in what we call the suck. That is something that is that you train quite a bit on. But the thing that you learn more than anything is communication is your most powerful tool. Observation and concealment is your most powerful tools. Much more powerful than the weapon that you carry around. In fact, the majority of your time as a scout sniper, if you become a scout sniper, is that you send back information as a type of intelligence and become a very big player in the intelligence apparatus rather than someone who's actively shooting at the enemy.
So reporting is more important.
Reporting, communicating with higher command. And that translates also, unbelievably, that translates into the mission community, where when you are on a mission, you are usually needing to pray a lot, communicating with command, right? So you're doing a lot of communicating on the ground. But this is one of the things that I found extremely interesting when I did start working as a scout sniper. When you hear the word sniper and scout sniper, they're two different categories. To be a sniper means that you're a designated marksman. You're an individual who's good at shooting. Whereas a scout sniper is an individual who goes, like you had indicated, beyond enemy lines, usually in only a two-man team, which is the smallest team that you are allowed to operate in. And by being in that two-man team, you learn to rely on one another. You learn to rely on communication and concealment, those two things. And one of the things that a lot of the command uses you for is reporting back information about the enemy's activities, their strong points, their weak points, being able to talk about positions and share that in a way that the command would be able to understand. The other thing is harassment. I learned this from, the more you learn about Satan, the more you can realize one of the main roles for a scout sniper is harassment. Because you're only a two-man team, you're not going to hold back a platoon or a company-size enemy, right? So what do? You begin to pick away at the feeling that they have of safety. You can't actually take away their safety, but if you can take away their feeling of being safe, you've won the day. And so one of the things that you talk about doing is psychological warfare. Let me give you an example. For instance, if I have a unit that is in movement and I shoot the second guy in a patrol, they get back up, they return fire towards me, they get back up and they start to move. I shoot that second guy again. They return fire, they get up, they start to move. I shoot that second guy again. Now they say, you're walking point, I'm walking the second, in the formation. I'm walking cover. I would say, no, I'm not walking cover. You walk cover. Why? Because you've taken away my safety. I've seen in the last 3 instances, the second guy has been taken down. The enemy sometimes plays games, I think, sometimes with our mind in that way, that he's able to stop an entire movement, an entire company size or larger moving towards an objective, just by taking away our feeling of safety, by making us run for cover. You get to learn a little bit of the mind games on that side of things. And I've been very appreciative of that.
And this is part of the reason, I think, as a background, it shows that God is using the things that we go through in life, like your military background, that is actually something that is being useful for you now in the current position, because we need to have a smooth transition from military. You came into this missions work. You need to bring us into that first. How did you get into that?
Yeah, that's not an easy transition, right? How do you go from being a scout sniper to a missionary in China?
We'll get back to some of those things shortly.
So I was in the military. Absolutely loved the military, but God called me out. I was very active with a church in Southern California. I became an ordained minister. The entire time I was in the military, I was preaching, sharing. I even wrote a book for people to study the Bible while they're in the military. I wrote a book called Jesus and the Sniper while I was in the military for people that were following God and wanting to follow God inside the military ranks. But I felt that God called me out to be in ministry. So I got out, went to university full time, and went to work for a police department in Southern California. So for about 1 year, I was working for a police department. And during that time, my wife, who was a missionary, she grew up as a missionary in China, she got a notebook in the mail. And the notebook was written by a professor that was in southern China in a place called Guilin. And he had a person who had just escaped from prison hiding in his house. And this man who had just escaped from China's most maximum security prison didn't know how long he was going to be alive. Nobody knew that he was even alive. But he was able to escape from prison and hide in this professor's home. And while he was hiding, the professor wrote his story down in English, very rough English. We like to call it Chinglish. Mm-hmm. So he wrote it in Chinglish, Chinese English. And that notebook was then sent to my wife in California. And I remember late at night working for the police department, because I worked a graveyard shift, and going through and reading this notebook of broken language as my wife was taking it and put it into a digital format for a man to write a book about it. That book became The Heavenly Man. And that's how I was introduced to China, was from his story, from the raw pages of a notebook. And then we felt called to start coming and serving to China.
When you mentioned your wife, when did that happen? In the military, after the military, police time?
Yep.
When?
So I was in the military.
All right.
And I had met my wife, who was going to university very close to where I was stationed. So we met during that time. We had our very first date on a Sunday morning at Pastor Chuck Smith's church in Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And I met her the night before. And I'm going to make a confession. So in the confession, I met her the night before, and I was just so attracted to her. I would have done anything to be with her. So we were talking about our faith, and then she asked me, which church do I go to? And I said, what church do you go to? And she said, Calvary Chapel. I'd never been to a Calvary Chapel in my life. So I said, really? Me too. And she said, which one? And I said, which one do you go to? And she said, Costa Mesa. I said, me too. Crazy. So the next day we went to church together. And I remember sitting beside her. And when I became a Christian at 14, I listened to Pastor Chuck Smith's teaching over and over every night. So I knew him by voice, and I knew what he looked like, but I didn't know this was his church, didn't know anything about the church there in California. And as I'm sitting there, I watch him walk by me. I said, that's Pastor Chuck Smith. My wife said, of course. I was like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I knew that. I was just wanting to, say that he just arrived, So, but that was my first date. And later I did confess that I wasn't completely honest. This was my first time to this church.
What a good checkup line. It's a good alternative to all the stuff that's going on today. Well, she's no less than the daughter of Brother Ren.
Yes.
Who we had on the program here, who's famous in Norway for being Brother Eugene's interpreter.
Yes.
So you married more or less into the ministry.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were asked to come and serve in China. This was during a time that I was going through university and working at the police department. The initial offer we turned down, but then God began to speak to us, and we felt, no, this is something that we can do. So it fit in our schedule to do it for 6 months. So we went to China to serve for 6 months. This was in '99 that we made that decision, and 25 years later, we are still there.
Amazing story, my friend. Good to hear. We will just say that we will continue a talk in a different program where we will go more into details. Also, why are you wearing the cap? Is that just a fashion thing, or is it purpose with it?
Yeah, I often wear it. It helps at least a little bit with the identity as I travel.
Because you've been working as a scout sniper. You've learned how to hide in plain view.
A little bit, yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you. We're looking forward to our next conversation in another program. God bless you. Thank you for coming and being with us and sharing today.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege to be here.
Da det jo bare slik at du kan jo ikke gå glipp av neste program når Eugene blir med oss, og han vil fortelle mer i det programmet om hva som skjer i Asia i det hele tatt, og tilbake til Jerusalem-visjonen. Takk for at du har sett på Asia Link TV i dag. Vi anbefaler deg å gå på våre websider. Der kan du både lese det som foregår nå for tiden, det oppdatert og det siste nye. Du kan også få bladet vårt, som helt gratis, og vi sender det gjerne hjem til deg, slik at du kan ta med deg disse gode vitnesbyrdene om noe av det Gud gjør i vår verden i dag. Jeg ønsker deg Guds rike velsignelse. Herre med deg. Takk for i dag.